in Genesis. We're going to finish chapter 13. I think there were 4 or 5 verses I couldn't get to last week. So we'll finish that, and then we'll get into chapter 14. Very interesting chapter. So, Lord, guide us. We pray that your Spirit be here, that the words that are said are words of truth. Let everyone be discerning, as Paul, as is said about in Acts 17:11, that we should look and see which things are so. Always give us a discerning spirit about whatever is taught of your word. And lift this time up in Christ's name, amen. Okay, so let's turn to, and we're going to start out in chapter 13, verses 14 through 18. And I'm going to read them and then talk a little bit about them. So it says, and the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. And notice where he is. He's on the top of a mountainous area in the south end in the Negev. Okay, so he is in elevation right now. Remember, he goes back to Bethel, and where the altar is. Okay, it's in the Judean hills. So the Lord says to him, look all around. Okay, look at this territory that I'm going to give you. And in verse 15, for all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. And I will make you, your descendants, the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, so your descendants can also be numbered. Arise, walk around the land through its length and its breadth, for I will give it to you. And Abram moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron. And there he built an altar to the Lord. So he builds another altar. He builds one in Bethel, and now he moves back. Remember, he's moving from Egypt north, right? Lot's with him, but they're going to have a problem here. They've actually had a problem. And so what we see is that God is reiterating the promise of the land and the descendants to him and saying to him, okay, you're back from Egypt. You're back from making some mistakes. Okay, let's get back on track. So look at this land, look every direction, and go visit the whole thing. So he is to be a nomad. He is to be a wanderer. He is to be a sojourner. He is not supposed to, go to a town and decide to build a house and live there. It's not what he's called to do, right? Okay.
I never realized that.
I'm sorry?
I never realized that.
Yeah.
Think about that. You're right.
Yeah. Now, we contrast that, of course, to Lot. So let me talk about some of the contrast. I think this will help summarize these 4 or 5 verses. All right. Number one, differences between Abraham and Lot. Okay. Number one, Abraham walked by faith. Not always, but predominantly he does. And of course, Lot walked by sight. He saw these things in the valley of Siddim, the Jordan Valley. He saw it was agriculturally well watered. He saw these cities. He saw, and it reminded him of what?
Back home.
Egypt. And of course, that's what he saw, and there's where he went. Number two, Abraham wasn't really obsessed by wealth. He had wealth, but he seemed not to be really obsessed by wealth. Lot, I think, was quite greedy. And it's part of why the conflict occurred between the herdsmen of Lot and the herdsmen of Abram, because Lot gets upset. There's not enough pasturing area for his herds to get, fair treatment, get as much as they need. And so this brings up this conflict that Abram resolves by saying, you pick your way. and I'll go the other way, right? But there's a motive here on Lot's part. And that is to grow his herds, to have more land, etc. Thirdly, Abram has spiritual desires. Okay? We talk about in Hebrews 11 that he sought a spiritual city built by God. Okay? But Lot has worldly desires, and he decides to go down into the valley and eventually, not first, but eventually move into Sodom. And you couldn't possibly be more worldly than Sodom. And that's where he decides to stake his claim.
He was a rich man.
He was. They both were, but I think, again, like I was saying, I think there was a difference in attitude about wealth between the two of them. Now, also, Abram was an heir to a nation and a people and a land. Okay? Lot ended up, because of his choices, he ended up being an heir of almost nothing. He loses the town, he loses his home, he has to run to the hills, okay? And he ends up not having a legacy.
Oh, with his two daughters, and then those two sons.
Right.
Bad boys.
Oh, yeah. And then he ends up having two sons, which of course end up being a problem for the nation of Israel for years and years and years in the future as a result. Now, also, Abram was a man of aspiration. In other words, seeing God's plan and future, where I think that where Lot was a man of an ambition. He had ideas about how he was going to make things work. We see, I mean, I think you can also conclude when we get to the 19th chapter, we talk about, you know, the two angels coming to Sodom, to Lot's house. You can see also, I think, these ambition, because he starts out moving there, but by the time you get to chapter 19, where do you find Lot? In the gates of the city, which means what about him?
He has a power.
He has authority.
Authority, right.
He's now a muckety-muck in Sodom. Okay, that's the place where things were decided. You know, cases were judged. Land was granted, and all these things. Now, also, Abraham desired righteousness. We know that because here in chapter 15, what's it going to say? Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Okay, Lot desired the satisfaction of his desires. That's what he sought. Now, the Lord reiterates these promises, as we just read, to Abram, okay, of land and descendants. But he adds a new wrinkle to the promise that hasn't been before. And that is, he says that not only will he have offspring, but they will be literally too numerous to count. Okay? Now, this has got to be very interesting to a man in his probably 77, between 75 and 80 at this point. His wife is between 65 and 70 at this point. And again, they had no children. You know, Sarah is known to be barren. Okay? So it's an interesting promise God makes, isn't it, to them? They're going to go from 0 to innumerable. So it says, of course, that not only are they going to be like the dust of the earth, this is the first thing he says, all right, but also later we see, and we find this in chapter 15, verse 5, we see that he says that they're going to be also like the sand of the seashore, another image of how numerous they are. And thirdly, in Genesis 22:17, they're going to be like the stars in the night sky. Okay? So lots and lots of people. Now, you go, well, the Jews, by the time, let's say, of the time of Moses and Joshua's day, we estimate that they maybe were around 2.5 million. But remember something, because of the issue with Ishmael, Abraham also fathered to another large group of people called the Arabs. He's also father to them because of Ishmael. So there's lots and lots of individuals eventually as time goes on, generations go on. If you had tried to add up all the people of Jews and Arabs that have lived since 2000-ish BC to today, that'd be a lot of people over 4,000 years, wouldn't it?
Kind of like the sands of the sea.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a true statement. Now, again, the Lord commands him to not stay in one place, as opposed to the desire of Lot, but to survey his land. And of course, and to see the area in which his descendants will eventually inherit. Note something that's interesting here. He's living somewhere between, we estimate, 2100 to 2000 BC. That is probably about the time that Abram lives. Now, it takes 500 years before his descendants will inherit the land. Why? Because for 430 years, where are they going to be?
Egypt.
In Egypt. They don't inherit it then. Then they wander for 40 years. So now we have at least 470. Okay. So we're talking about from this promise, it's 500 years it's going to be before this promise is realized. And they do inherit the land, obviously, the time of the conquest with Joshua. True?
Yep.
So sometimes God's timing is not very quick from our standpoint.
It's his time.
It's his time, not our time. Okay. Matter of fact, and I'll read this to you. In the book of Joshua, you can turn if you want to, in chapter 1, this whole idea is reiterated as Joshua, of course, Moses has now died. Joshua has led them out of the wilderness. In verse 2 of Joshua 1, it says, "Now Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, cross this Jordan, you and all the people, to the land which I'm giving to them, the sons of Israel. Every place in which the sole of your foot treads, I have given it to you, since I spoke to you, as I spoke to Moses." Didn't we just hear that? He tells Abram, walk around, in essence, put your print all over the land. Okay. And then he says, from the wilderness of Lebanon, even as far as the great river, the Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, as far as the great sea, toward the setting of the sun will be your territory. So they will eventually have that. Actually, we've already studied in 2 Samuel, the last book we covered, that's the only time that they actually take possession of all of it. Do you remember that? David has this war with all these nations around. It's in, I forget, what is it, in chapter 11? I forget, of 2 Samuel. And he conquers all these nations. And that is the first time that they actually literally have control of all this land, which in a matter of another 50, 75 or so years, they lose because of Solomon's not entirely faithful about what he's given, isn't he? Okay. Now, let's move into Genesis 14 now. Now, if you simply read, because you're going to read all kinds of names of all kinds of kings, you're going to read all kinds of names of all kinds of places, you're going to read a story of a series of battles, and unless you pay attention to the numbers in the chapter, and unless you pay attention to the meaning of the names in the chapter, you're not going to get a full idea about what this is all about. This chapter is about two things. It's about what literally goes on historically among all these people that are named, but it also is very much about what's going on satanically and demonically at the same time. It's the physical kingdom, but it's also the spiritual kingdom that's behind it. And that's what we're going to see here. All right?
Are any of these giants?
Oh, yes.
That's what I thought.
Oh, yes.
You got some giants.
So let me read verses 1 through 4, and then we'll study them. And it came about the days of Amraphel, the king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, and Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and Tidal, the king of Goyim, that they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, and with Shinab, king of Admah, and with Shemaber, king of Zoim, and the king of Bela, that is of Zor. Okay, so in verse 2, these are the name of towns or city states, if you want to put it, all around the valley of Siddim, the southern end of the Dead Sea. Remember, we're told Siddim means fields. So they call it the Valley of Fields. So at this point, it's a lush valley where lots of stuff is grown. And you have these city states all around it with their own king. Make sense? All right. Now, it says in verse 3, all these came as allies to the Valley of Siddim, that is, and this is Moses almost adding this as he writes, the Salt Sea. We know from both geological studies and all kinds of things that back around 2000 BC, the Dead Sea wasn't a salt sea. Okay, it was the remnant, a remnant of the flood because it's in such a low area. Remember, the Dead Sea is in literally the lowest valley of the earth. It's 1,355 feet below sea level. You don't get much lower on the earth than this. So water accumulated there as a result of Noah's flood, and this is the water that's there at this point. Okay, make sense? Okay. Verse 4, 12 years they had served Chedorlaomer, but the 13th year they rebelled. Now, let's start to look at this. First of all, as we talk often about the law of first mention, notice this is the law of first mention of warfare. First time in the Bible there's a war. It's going to be a series of wars, actually. So it's both historical and it's typological. Both. Okay? Keep that in mind. It shows you spiritual elements and not very good ones. And also it shows us the worldly reasons behind what these kings do. Now, keep in mind also, what's the context of what we're reading? God has just reiterated his promise to Abram of this land, right? Keep that in your mind because that's, I think, central to what ends up going on here.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So that's right. So there were a lot, and Abram were standing on the mountain and they're looking in all directions. So a lot goes toward
The valley
the valley
to the east.
But then God comes back and says, all this land you see is yours.
To Abram.
Okay, so we're
Not the lot.
Huh?
Yeah.
I mean, so would that technically be where Lot's at then too? I mean, he's looking over, there's Lot way down there. That's all mine too?
Well, that's where he goes. He
No.
goes into this territory.
Abram.
Abram never goes into that territory.
Right.
Okay, well, maybe he eventually does because of what we'll talk about next week.
Yeah,
Because
that's part of Israel, isn't it? I mean,
oh yeah,
that's part of their land.
right. So basically, it's all about this territory. Remember, literally from this point, and even a little bit before it, God's all about his territory. If you have any idea wondering, why does all this stuff go on in the Middle East all the time with Israel? This is going to tell you why. Because it's the disputed territory.
That's right.
God says, this is my land, and you people of faith are going to live in it. And Satan says, no, no. Right? And this is what we're going to see here that's going on. So we have this kind of back and forth between the physical rulers, these kings, and of course, what I think are, and we're going to see, the entities behind the physical rulers. Remember, What does Satan call the New Testament? The God of this world. Okay? He gained the title deed because of Adam and Eve's fall, their sin, and that's when he gained it. Okay? Now.
But Jesus got that title deed back
Correct. Exactly.
on Calvary.
He did.
He just hasn't claimed it yet.
Yes. And we're going to talk about some of that too later tonight. So, what we see here is they assert their claim to this territory, and as a result, they threaten Abraham to an extent, but specifically they threaten Lot. Right? And we're going to see specifically how they end up doing that. Now, keep in mind two verses that I think are important. Again, here we're in Genesis. Now we're going to turn to the absolute opposite end of the Bible. Go to the 6th chapter of Revelation. What begins in Genesis ends in Revelation. You can't separate the two. So Revelation chapter 6, and I want to show you something here. Speaking of this person, I'm not going to say who it is. You tell me who it is. Okay? And I looked, and behold, a white horse. And he who sat on it had a bow and a crown, and was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. Who is this? It's Antichrist. Now, let me also say this if I can. Maybe this is going to sound like I'm being picky. I really don't like the term Antichrist.
Yeah.
I think it would be much more helpful, even though this is the tradition now to call him Antichrist, if we really called him Pseudo-Christ.
Right.
Okay? Because he's not the opposite of Christ. If he were the opposite of Christ, then he wouldn't deceive anyone in the end, right? But almost everyone's deceived by him, because he seems to have Christ-like elements to him. Tricky guy.
Tricky.
You know, during this time when he arises, you know, people are going to think he's the Messiah. Okay, so that's why I think it'd be better to call him Pseudo-Christ. All right?
That's where I think the UFO stuff comes into play pretty quick.
Especially when
I
people,
really do.
especially aren't people looking for the true Christ come in the pre-tribulation rapture before the Antichrist. So they're going to have their eyes on Antichrist as the true Christ.
Yep.
And they'll be deceived easily.
Yeah. And this is the
But
thing.
more important than we would think.
Yeah. This is the thing this is why actually I prayed. One of the reasons I prayed what I prayed tonight before, for us to have discernment. Because when we look at the events that are occurring now in the world, you have to be careful about what you're seeing. Is what you're seeing what you're meant to see, but is there something underneath it that you're not maybe easily seeing? And so what you're being shown is a bit deceptive, because there's another agenda going on underneath it. We have to be very, very careful. Matthew 24, 4 times Jesus said,
Don't be deceived.
be on the alert, don't be deceived.
Yeah.
And so be careful how you interpret events. We need to be in prayer all the time about trying to understand what's really happening. Okay? Now, also turn in Revelation chapter 16. Starting verse 12. Very interesting verse. And the 6th angel poured out his bowl upon the great river, the Euphrates. Now, as we go on, I'm going to say this, as we go on tonight and look at where a lot of these individuals, these kings, these 4 kings come from, guess where they come from? All around the Euphrates. You'll see it, okay? So, and its water was dried up, and the way might be prepared for the kings of the east. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon and out of the mouth of the beast, right? The beast being who? Quote, Antichrist, okay? And out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. And then 14 is going to tell you what they are. For they are spirits of demons performing signs which go out to the kings of the whole world. Why? What's their purpose? To gather them together for the war, for the great day of God Almighty. Okay? Now, I'm just proposing to you that an awful lot of war that goes on this planet is demonically driven. It has a demonic, satanic, spiritual element to it that drives it. Certainly, Satan loves it, number one, because he loves to see the death of people, right? Okay?
Yep.
And he makes these countries have these issues in which they go to war because he gains all kinds of things in the process of war. He gains crisis, okay? And what have we learned, especially what we've been seeing in the last few years, even here? What happens in crisis?
Fear, panic.
Fear, panic. We just had the whole COVID thing, did we not? And as a result, what do government entities do during crisis?
They control, try to control.
Right.
Change things.
They put in policies and procedures and things that put usually more control over people. Crisis usually leads to loss of freedom. Okay? Keep it in mind. Okay? Now, the key, of course, go back to our text in Genesis. So, the key to this whole issue that's going to occur is, of course, in verse 4. Let me read it again. 12 years they had served Chedorlaomer, but the 13th year they rebelled. So, you see what's happening here.
No, who's Chedorlaomer? Okay,
Chedorlaomer is the head of this 4-king coalition. And it's gonna be more clear in a minute when I go over their names for you, okay? What they mean and where they're from, okay? He's the big wig of these 4 kings, all right? And these 5 kings that are in the area of the Valley of Siddim for 12 years have paid tribute to Chedorlaomer and the other 3 kings. You know what tribute is?
Mhm.
They get taxed. You know, they have to sell or they have to give products or agricultural products so that the bigwig doesn't come down and wipe them out. Common practice in the ancient world.
Russia was paying tribute to Mongolia for 400
That's right. It's a good point. Russia paid tribute to Mongolia in the past for 400 years. Common experience all through history. So the 13th year, the 5 kings down here at the south end of the Dead Sea say, what? We're not going to do it. Now, I said numbers mean things, right? It's interesting that the number 13, in terms of biblical understanding, means rebellion.
Mhm.
It's used over and over again of rebellious people and rebellious elements, right? So, interestingly, they pay tribute for 12 years, but rebel in the 13th. What does the number 12 mean in biblical understanding? It's the biblical number for government. So the government, quote, the 4 kings that they obeyed, okay, they now in the 13th year rebel and won't pay the tribute. So this is what's going on that's motivating what's going to occur, right? Now, we find that we have now discovered Assyrian clay tablets. They were found in Mari. Mari is an ancient city in northern Syria. Okay? They speak of a number of interesting people. Let me give you their Sumerian names. One of them is Eri-Aku. We call him in this text Arioch, the king. There's another one found whose name is Amrudi. Okay, we in this text call him Amraphel. There's another one spoken of in these clay texts called Kedar Lagula, Kedar Lagumal. We translate that Chedorlaomer. All right. And also there's one in the ancient Sumerian texts, okay, called Tugola, and we call him in our translation, Tidal. So we have archaeological finds of texts that have all these names that talked about they are names of kings. So,
Amazing.
yeah, archaeological information has validated what we're reading about here. So, like I said, this has mystical elements to it, but it's a true historical event that's occurring also. So, it says that, interestingly, that this Tidal, okay, he assembled a group of people called the Uman Manda. The Uman Manda. It means, literally, in these texts, barbarian nomadic tribes of the Kurdish mountains. That would be, this map isn't big enough, I don't think, to show it. But I don't have a pointer. Can you throw me the pointer here? Oof. Okay, or pass it.
It's mine.
Okay, it's mine. All right. If the map isn't big enough, but as you would go up higher here, you would go into, up here you'd have Assyria, to the little bit south in the west would be the Hittite region. Okay, so up here you have these four kings of these four kingdoms up here. And of course, what happens is, in our text, we're just going to read, they get together in a coalition and they start to move south. Okay, and they're going to go onto the east side of the Jordan Valley, and they're going to proceed down here until they get down to the bottom. Okay, then they're going to go west. They go through the area of Zoar and come around here. Okay, this is the general movement that's going to occur of these four kings that are being talked about. Now, let's talk about what their names mean, because that's going to give you information about who they are. The first one, his name is Amraphel. He's called the king of Shinar. Shinar, the plain of Babylonia, right? Okay, so that's where he is, in the Mesopotamian area. Now, what does his name mean? Amraphel means the speaker of dark sayings. That is, the speaker of magic. His name also means the enlightener of secrets, which talks about, of course, mediumship, information gotten from the spirit world.
Psychic.
Yeah, he's also called the keeper of the gods. Those are the things that his name means. Now, in his name, there's a portion of it called Ayam. It's the Hebrew portion called Ayam. Okay, it is actually I think it's an adjective. Yes, it is an adjective in Hebrew, and that Ayam means terrible, the terrible one. And also, there's also a base word in his name that is the word for Amim. And we're going to talk about the Amim in a few minutes, because the Amim are a tribe of giants, okay? And their name literally means the terrible ones. You'll find them mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 10, we'll look at in a second. So here's the first king. So what do you think he's all about?
A bad dude, man.
All right, satanic evil things, right?
Yeah.
All right, here's the second guy. His name is Arioch. He's the king of Elasar. Now, Elasar is related to, in terms of Hebrew, it's very close to the word Elisha. And Elisha is, you don't have to turn here, but it's a place that's mentioned in Genesis 10, the Table of Nations, verse 4. It's another name for the island of Cyprus. Now, one of the things that Cyprus is called, even you go there today, it's called the Island of the Giants. Because if you go to Cyprus, there are tombs and temples and monuments all over it of these giant peoples. Okay? I would love to go to Cyprus because the archaeology is incredible there of all this. I'd love to see them. And I know they're all on the island. Now, Arioch also means, his name also means the chief of executioners.
Jeez.
But it's more. He's called the chief of executioners of the god Nebu. Okay? Matter of fact, if you want to.
No doubt these gods were they're there at one time. Everybody's seen them.
No, they're the demigods, right?
Yeah, they're part man, part.
Yeah, so yeah, the demigods, right? They're part man, part, quote, divine, fallen angel. So if you would turn to Isaiah, to your right, let's look at this. Go to chapter 46. This is in a section that talks about God's judgment of Babylon. And he says, Bel has bowed down. Who is Bel?
The devil.
Well, yeah, he's also a demigod,
Demigod.
okay, that is,
Baal.
that is, we often call him Baal, B-A-A-L, Phoenician demigod, right? Okay, the Baal and the Ashtaroth. It says, Bel has bowed down, Nebo stoops over. Their images are consigned to the beasts of the cattle. The things that you carry are burdensome, a load for the weary beast. So he's talking about these gods that one should not bow down to. Okay, and the land is being judged, Babylon, because of these gods. Now, Arioch also has another, in Hebrew, it means lion-like, or another phrase is the vicious predator. Okay, actually, we don't have to turn here, but in 2 Samuel 23, verses 20 and 21, now I guess a year ago, right? When we studied 2 Samuel, we saw this event that occurred, that one of David's men gets into battle with this giant who is called lion-like. What's his name in Hebrew? Arioch. Okay? All right. Back to our text in Genesis. Now, his name also means the servant of the moon god, and of course, again, connection to all these demigods. Now, the third person is the most powerful king, overwhelmingly. That's Chedorlaomer. He's the king of Elam. Elam is a well-known place in the ancient world. It's southwest Persia. Okay? Southwest Persia. Again, I can't, it's not quite on this map, but it's the area south. His name, among other things, means the binding of sheaths. You know, you take a flax or something and you bind it together, and it implies that he's the leader that binds together these three other kings and their armies, because he's more powerful than the other three. All right? Now, so it also points out in his name, Lomar, that he's a servant of the demigod named Lagamar. Lagamar. Lagamor was in the Assyrian area, he was known as an underworld god who judged the souls in Hades. Okay?
Jeez.
In Elamite language, it's the noun form, and it means literally, Amar, it means no mercy. So it's he who judges the souls in Hades and shows no mercy. Think there's a spiritual element here to this guy?
Nice company.
Okay, yeah. Now, the fourth guy, the king, is Tidal. He is the king of Goyim. Now, a lot of people have struggled with this because Goyim, nations. Okay, anybody that's not a Jew is in Hebrew, a Goyim. Those that are not Jews, the other nations other than Israel. Okay. Although the word Tidal is a little hard to translate, okay, but apparently it means the evil progeny, evil offspring. All right. It also says that he's the ruler over Umma Manda. And as I said earlier, these are the nomadic or barbarian tribes of the Kurdish mountains in northern Syria. Of course, Goyim means nations, and what it means is that he's the ruler over all of these tribes up there, the Goyim. Okay, he commands them. Okay, you follow me so far? So these names of these four kings imply strong connections to satanic and demonic entities. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay, so these are the guys we're talking about that are up north. Now, the five kings, of course, as we said, are in the Valley of Siddim, the Valley of the Fields. The first one is Bera. He's the king of Sodom. What is his name being Bera? It means the son of evil. Okay?
That's a nice thing to name your kid.
Okay, yeah. The next king of this city-state his name is Bersha. He's the king of Gomorrah, and it means with all iniquity. So he's the king of all iniquity. Then there's Shinab. He is the king over the city-state of Admah, the town of Admah, and it means the splendor of his father. And you can imagine what father he's probably talking about. Okay, that's my opinion. But the fourth king is Shemember. He's the king of the city-state Zaboim, and it means the soaring on high, or the lofty one. See, what was Lucifer called? He who wanted to soar on high to the place of Yahweh himself, right?
Right.
Okay. Fifth one is Bela. He's the king of the city-state of Zoar, and his name means the one of destruction, or the one who consumes. So,
Now, Zor, that's where Lot actually went to, right?
yes, he ends up running to that area because he runs west into the mountains after the judgment, or about the time of the judgment. Okay, so these kings, these five, are equally men of evil over cities of evil.
Were those names awarded to them, like a pharaoh name? Who gave them those names?
I don't know.
Mama.
Mama, well, she must have been a
Mama, yeah. Evil mama. Okay.
Evil mama did.
Now, so this is the information that's embedded in these first four verses, which gives you some idea of who we're talking about, right? Both of the four kings and the five kings. Now let's read, and we'll close with this tonight. We'll read verses 5 through 7 and talk about this. Okay? So Genesis 14, 5 through 7. And in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer, remember he's the big ruler of these other three, Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him came and defeated the Raphaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim, and the Zuman in the area of Ham, and the Emim in Shava Kiriathim, and the Horites in Mount Seir, as far as El Paran, which is called the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, that is the town called Kadesh, and conquered all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who lived in Hazazon Tamar. Now, let me try to interpret this for you. This is really creepy when you start to realize what's going on here. Okay? So, we see that the four kings move south. Okay? And as I said earlier, they're way up here and they start to come down. They move from up here to the southeast and they start to enter here above the town of Dan on the map. Okay? As they move down, the first place they come to is Ashtoreth, and they deal with this group called the Raphaim. Sound familiar at all?
Yeah,
Done.
Let's talk about the Raphaim.
what a fight that was.
Okay? These are the people now that these groups that they're meeting as they're coming down, these four kings. So they move down, like I said, the Jordan River Valley into the area of what we call also, this area up here is called Bashan.
Yeah.
All right, Bashan. All right. Now, Bashan, of course, then they move further south into what's called the Ammonite area. And of course, also into eventually down here, the area of the Amorites and the Horites, and also down there are the Moabites. After they move down to the south there, then they turn west and they move into the area of the Valley of Siddim. And of course, that's where they confront the five kings. Now, along the way, they run into these tribes first here. Their first group they run into are the tribes of the Raphaim. Okay? Let's talk about the Raphaim. The word in Hebrew means the dead ones. The Raphaim. Okay? Matter of fact, in Job and in a number of cases, also in Isaiah, they're called the Rapha in Hebrew,
Really did.
which means the dead of the dead. Okay? Now, they are hybrid giant offspring of the Nephilim. How do we know that? Turn to Numbers, if you would. Chapter 13. Interesting world that Abraham lived in, wasn't it?
Oh, man, I'm scared that whole never go to sleep.
Okay. So in verse 33 of Numbers 13, what does it say? This is talking about the spies, okay, when they go into the land just before the conquest. It says, there also we saw the Nephilim, who were also called the sons of Anak, who are part of the Nephilim. And we became like grasshoppers in our own sight as we were in their sight. So what do the 12 spies see? Giants. And they're scared. And 10 of them say, no way, absolutely no way to do this. Now, if you'll notice also, if you'll turn to Deuteronomy chapter 2. So from Numbers on to Deuteronomy, not too many pages to your right. Deuteronomy chapter 2. Verse 10. And the Emim lived there formerly, a people of great, as great and numerous and tall as the Anakim. Verse 11. Like the Anakim, they're also regarded as the Raphaim, but the Moabites called them the Amim. Right? Who are the Amim? They're another tribe of giants. Right? The Amim literally mean the terrible ones. That's what they mean. Now, they talk about all these groups being part of the Raphaim. Why? Because the Raphaim, that is the dead, are the spiritual source behind the giant peoples. In other words, when the Nephilim died in Genesis chapter 6, their bodies died, but their spirit soul got trapped on the earth. Okay, those souls are called the Rapha, the dead. And therefore these giant peoples became possessed by the Rapha.
Was it, did you get possessed and then grow, or were you already a giant?
Who knows? Who knows exactly? But the point is, this is why all of these giant peoples are all satanic, okay, in nature. So we see, and again, I'm not going to go into all of these, but let me give you some references about, let's look at a couple of them, okay?
Mhm.
Go to Job chapter 26. Job 26. Get over here. Oh, come on. I'm losing my place here. Esther, Job, there we go. Job 26. And we're going to look at verses 5 and 6. Job tells us the information. He says, the departed spirits tremble. Literally means, the word tremble means they're twisted. Okay? Under the waters and their inhabitants. Naked is Sheol before him. He's talking about Abaddon. Okay? Naked is Sheol before him, and Abaddon has no covering. He stretches out the north over the empty space and hangs the earth on nothing. In other words, he's talking about this place where the where this ruler called Abaddon lives, and it's what we would call Hades. And all these spirits, the Rapha, are in this place. Follow?
Yeah.
Okay. You might want to also look at, interestingly, in Proverbs 9. So move past Psalms to Proverbs, chapter 9.
Psalms 9, you said?
No, Proverbs 9.
Oh, Proverbs.
There we go. Proverbs, chapter 9, as I move my fingers here. And we're going to look at verse 18 of Proverbs 9.
The dead.
It says, but he does not know that the dead, or the Rapha, are there, that their guests are in the depths of Sheol. Okay? Rapha are the spirits of the Nephilim, and many of them exist, of course, in Sheol. Right?
Yes, sir.
Now,
Are they here today?
well, I think we're going to probably come to know them in not too long, because you look at the stuff that goes on in Revelation during the 7 years, and you have this absolute flood
It was a pit.
of these demonic spirit entities onto the earth.
Yeah, it was a pit.
Right.
And
Of course, Revelation 9 talks about 200 of them that are locked away, that is the fallen angels, that also their spirits were Rapha. Okay, that was their spirit, Rapha. Now, also, just turn over to Proverbs 21. Verse 16. Proverbs 21:16. And a man who wanders from the way of understanding will rest in the assembly of the Rapha.
Dead. One more time.
It says, and a man who wanders from the way of understanding, he will rest in the assembly of the Rapha,
That's a
the
lot.
dead. Bad place to be. You don't want to be there.
Indeed.
Okay? I'm not going to go on, but if you want other references of the Rapha, you'll find them in Isaiah 14, verse 9. You find another reference in Isaiah 26, verse 14. Now, then they move south. okay? And they moved down into this area of first the tribe of the Zumim, and then finally the tribe of the Emim, okay? Now, Zuman, or sometimes in the Bible also called the Zamzuman, same thing, okay? We find them in Deuteronomy 2, verse 10. Why don't you turn back to there? Turn back to Deuteronomy chapter 2. Deuteronomy 2. It says, the Emim lived there, formerly a people as great and numerous and as tall as the Anakim. Okay? And then also, you can go to verse 20.
Right there, 11, and the Anakim, they.
Yeah, the Horites.
Count as Rephaim.
Yeah, the Anakim, they were regarded also as the Raphaim, but the Moabites called them Emim. And then if you go down to verse 20 of that chapter,
20.
he says, it is also regarded as the land of the Raphaim, for the Raphaim formerly lived in it, but the Ammonites called them the Zamzummim. Right? A people as great and numerous and as tall as Anakim, but the Lord destroyed them before them, and they dispossessed them and settled in their place. So, you know, it amazes me that people talk in Genesis 6, they don't want to talk about the reality of the giant peoples, the Nephilim. And yet, do you see who populates all of Israel? All the offspring of the Nephilim in all these tribal groups. Okay, and they're all giant peoples.
And you see all the evidence in these big old stones?
Oh, yes. Lots of evidence. So then, of course, the word the Zamzummim means the powerful ones, and the word Emim means the terrible ones. Now notice, go back to Genesis 14. It tells you that, because we just went through verse 5, and then you see here that it talks about that. Where is it? Talk about the Ashtaroth. There it is. The town or the area of Ashtaroth was the capital city of this area here, over up here, called Bashan. Okay, Bashan later has a very interesting ruler. We find him in Deuteronomy chapter 3. His name is Og.
Oh.
And what do we learn in verse 11 of Deuteronomy 3 about his bed?
13 feet.
13 and a half feet long, 6 feet wide. He's a giant. Metal of iron, it says.
Yeah.
So we see he is a king of giant peoples. Okay. Then notice it talks about Sheva, Kiriathaim. You see that one mentioned? Okay. These are the plains that are on the east side of the Jordan River. And later, years later, it's the home to this guy named Sihon. Okay. He's called the king of Heshbon. Heshbon is his capital. Okay. And of course, as you read about him, you realize he's a giant also. Okay. Now, it also speaks about the Horites. The Horites, according to Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 22, they're on the east side of the Jordan River Valley in the land that we call Edom, and they're connected to a mountain area, if you'll notice in the text, Mount Seir, and also a wilderness around it called the wilderness of Paran. Okay, in this area also we find all kinds of giant peoples who end up later being conquered, interestingly, by the descendants of Esau. Yeah. And then the descendants of Esau take it over. Now, finally, this coalition of these four kings sweeping down this area, after conquering all these giant tribal groups, they turn west and come into here, the Valley of Siddim, these towns around here. Now, notice what we've realized. We have 4 kings connected to evil that marched south to defeat the Raphaim, the giant peoples, okay, who are, of course, all giants and evil. They finally come into the valley of Siddim to confront or battle these 5 kings whose names and cities are all names of evil. Would you agree? All right. And of course, they end up defeating them. So, this brings up to me an interesting question, and I'll pose it to you. Go to Matthew chapter 12. I couldn't help but ask this question. Matthew chapter 12. Jesus, of course, has cast out a demon. The Pharisees are not happy, okay? Starting in verse 25, and knowing their thoughts, that is the thoughts of the Pharisees,
Yes.
he said to them, any kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and any city or house divided against itself shall not stand. And if Satan casts out Satan, he is divided against his kingdom. How then shall his kingdom stand?
And that's just what happened.
What we just read
It's Satan,
is
Satan.
elements of Satan casting out, conquering Satan. So you go, that's interesting.
They hate
What does that mean?
It was different.
Okay. Now, here's what I think it means. You decide for yourselves as you understand the text, the names, and the meaning. Okay. I think that it could be that there was a far bigger threat to Satan, which was far more important to him than killing off some of his people. What was the threat? What was the threat to Satan that's being dealt with here? It's Abram. He's the threat. And the promise to him is the threat. Because the promise is that all of this area
Yeah.
and territory is going to be his under the guidance of Yahweh. And I think this is why Satan inspires these evil kings to do what they're doing. He's going to come down into this area where Abram and his nephew Lot are. And of course, they're going to do something, and we're going to see it next week. They not only conquer this area, but they take Lot with them.
North of Damascus.
Okay. This provokes a very interesting event that we're going to talk about next week, which
150.
also is incredibly mystical in its nature.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, yes.
So, what I think is that this event, this promise to Abram, is the foothold that God uses, that Yahweh uses, and over time would eventually result in Satan's kingdom on the earth being defeated. And the kingdom of the earth eventually will end up being righteously possessed again by the Creator, who rules it for 1,000 years. All right? This is the beginning of the end of Satan's kingdom. The beginning starts right here with Abram in the land. Make sense? Okay. Now, one last thing. I want you to turn to Revelation 17 to close tonight. Revelation 17. And we're going to look at verses 12 through 14 and then also 17. Okay, this is speaking about Antichrist's nations, kingdoms, rulers. Okay, it's starting verse 12, and it says, and the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. So who is giving them authority? The beast. Who is the beast? Antichrist. Okay. Verse 13. These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. What's the purpose? Verse 14. These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are the called and the chosen and the faithful. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Now, verse 17. Interesting verse. For God has put it in their hearts. Now, who's they that he's talking about? He's talking about the beast and the 10 kings, their kingdom, right? For God has put it in their hearts to execute Yahweh's purpose by having a common purpose and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God should be fulfilled. So what is he saying? He's saying God allows these kings and the beast to stir up the nations, to come up with this coalition, just like the coalition we're reading about in Genesis 14, but there's going to be a definitive end to it. They think, Satan thinks, Antichrist thinks they're going to win. Okay?
Just like Satan thought he was gonna win at Calvary.
Absolutely, exactly the same. But God's going to allow them to do all this, and he's going to outsmart them and out-strategize them. And he comes in Revelation 19 and decimates them all. Okay?
You'd think they would know the scriptures and know that's what's gonna happen to them.
They don't believe the truth. They live lies. Okay? So, I think we have some very interesting parallels going on about what Satan does, groups he uses. And again, I think that what we're seeing here is that Satan is threatened because of the promise to Abraham about all this territory. You decide if you agree, but okay. Mike, would you close the prayer tonight?
Heavenly Father, once again, we thank you for the opportunity, Lord, to listen to your word being expounded. We thank you for Tim, for his study, and for the way, Lord, that you helped open up and reveal the truths that we need to know about. We thank you, God, for the understanding that we've gained tonight, and how we see, Lord, that the war that may not be visible to
Yes.
us is going on all around us.
All around us, absolutely.
And Lord, help us to be mindful of that in each and every day that we live.
Yes.
Help us, Lord, to be in your spirit and being conscious of everything that's going on. So guide us, lead us, give us wisdom, give us insight
Yes.
into these things, Lord, as we continue to study them. Help us, Lord, to be useful in your kingdom, Father, in Jesus' name.
Amen.